So the story of the spread of Catholicism globally begins with the story of Christopher Columbus sailing across the Atlantic on behalf of Spain in 1492. Christopher Columbus lands on the island of Hispaniola, which is today Haiti and the Dominican Republic, in the same year that Spain has completed its reconquest of the Iberian Peninsula. It has expelled the Islamic Caliphate from the southern city of Granada. And this is also the same year in which Jews are forcibly expelled from Spain. And so Columbus's entry into these Caribbean and Central American regions represents a form of the crusading ideology that is entrenched in Spanish identity and then so extended to these new zones of contact. And so what this means is that when these indigenous populations are encountered by Spaniards, that they'll be deemed as inferior to them because they're not Christian and because they do not share the same ethnicity as Spaniards. We see this with Columbus and his entry onto the island of Hispaniola and the treatment of the Taino inhabitants there, and this perception that they're both ready for conversion and subject already to Spanish royal authority. We see this in how Columbus writes to Queen Isabella about them as her willing subjects. Unfortunately, quite quickly, the native population of the Caribbean islands is quickly decimated by disease and exploitation. And so the question of how to manage this new enterprise also becomes very pressing. Alongside all these questions of authority and possession, in the year 1493, Pope Alexander VI has to arbitrate between competing claims about new territories by the Spanish and the Portuguese. Spaniards have moved across the Atlantic to lay claim to much of what's now the Caribbean, Central America, whilst the Portuguese have moved down the African coast and have also taken other Atlantic island territories like the Azores and Canary Islands and have begun to lay claim to areas around Brazil. What this means is that he issues a bull titled Inter Cetera that divides the Americas between Spain and Portugal. This is the beginning of what scholars now call the doctrine of discovery, though it did not have that name then. But this notion that Catholic Europe, Christian Europe, can lay claim to non-Christian territories by virtue of the Pope being Christ's representative on earth, the vicar of Christ, the successor of Peter, and so hence arbitrate politically among Christian rulers. And so let's read a little bit from Inter Cetera. This is in our book, A History of Christianity in Latin, or in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. This is document number 223A. I'm looking at page 284. This is a rather lengthy sentence, but I'm going to work my way through it. This is the bottom paragraph. And in order that you, the kings, may enter upon so great an undertaking, with greater readiness and hardiness endowed with the benefit of our apostolic favor, so that's the Pope in this case, we, the papacy, of our own accord, not at your instance nor at the request of anyone else in your regard, but of our own soul largesse and certain knowledge and the fullness of our apostolic power, by the authority of Almighty God, confer upon us blessed Peter and the vicarship of Jesus Christ. This is the papacy laying claim to all of its authority to do this, which we hold on earth, due by tenor of these presents, should any of said islands have been found by your envoys and captains, give, grant, and assign to you and your heirs and successors, kings of Castile and Leon, those are the United Kingdoms and Spain, forever, together with all their dominions, cities, camps, places, and villages, and all rights, jurisdictions, and appurtenances, all islands and mainlands found and to be found, discovered and to be discovered, towards the west and south by drawing and establishing a line from the Arctic Pole, namely the north, to the Antarctic pole, namely the south, no matter whether the said mainlands and islands are found and to be found in the direction of India towards any other quarter, the said lines will be distant, commonly known as the Azores and Cape Verde. So essentially, they're dividing up the world. And I have a map for you that shows the ways in which the decree of Enter Cetera divides up the world for Spaniards and Portuguese kingdoms. And so this notion that these explorers of these Christian nations, whenever they encounter any island or mainland that is non-Christian, these Christian rulers can simply lay claim to it because the papacy has given them this authority to do so. And so we see operating in this notion of a doctrine of discovery, the papal idea of a fullness of power or plenitude of power that we find in something like Boniface VIII's papal decree Unum Sanctum from 1302 that we reviewed previously. This notion that the Pope represents God's authority on earth. And so when it comes to other realms of creation that need to be arbitrated, the Pope is the person to arbitrate it because creation is God's. And the Pope has been appointed by God. And no salvation exists outside of the church. And hence, these things need to be brought within the church's orbit somehow and within Christendom's orbit. And so this is the second aspect, this notion of a cooperation between the crown and the church here in Spanish society, but of course it's in Portuguese society or other Christian societies that begin to do exploration work. This idea has already been cemented in Spanish life in the 13th century under the reign of King Alonso X. And so this all collaborates and concretizes more and more this notion of a doctrine of discovery. And so Queen Isabella issues a further decree in 1503 called the encomendero, which lays out Spanish ideas about what ought to happen to these indigenous people. This is document number 223B of our textbook. This is on page 285, and I'll read the middle portion here. And so it says, "It is our desire that these Indians be converted to our holy Catholic faith and be catechized in matters of faith, because this can be best done through communication between the Indians and the Christians who are on that island, and walking among them and dealing with them, and both sides helping each other to work the island, populate it, make it fruitful, and gather the gold that's there, so that these, my kingdoms and their neighbors, might benefit from it. I have sent this letter for that reason." So this notion that, well, we want the indigenous population to be Christian, but we also want them to work with us to extract resources from this territory. And so she goes on to say, "Therefore I order you, our governor, as soon as you see this letter, to compel and force these Indians to deal and converse with the Christians on that island, and work in its buildings, and gather gold and other metals, and do farm work and maintenance for the Christians who live on that island." So, at first it seems like maybe they're going to cooperate, but no, Queen Isabella says, no, once you get this letter, governor, go compel the Indians to, 1, listen to the gospel, and 2, work for us. And so the doctrine of discovery then is a form of subjugation of indigenous populations to Christian society that has expanded from Spain across the Atlantic to this new zone. This all begins to play out more and more as the point of contact shifts from the Caribbean to was now contemporary Mexico, at that point the Aztec Empire. So in 1519 to 1521, the conquistador Hernán Cortés conquers the Aztec Empire and renders all of that territory for Spain. Now, the Aztecs had a highly structured society that was complex in terms of religion, agricultural production, military organization. And it falls quickly. And the justification for its conquest is inter cetera. This is a non-Christian territory that Spain can rightly claim. Initially, Cortés is welcomed by the Emperor Montezuma as a returning god, Quetzalcoatl. There was an idea that this godlike hero would return from the east, and initially they tragically mistake Cortés for this figure. But Cortés and his conquistadors quickly slaughtered the nobility and used their advanced technology of horses, early forms of firearms, and the steel of their swords, and disease through contact to really weaken the Aztec Empire and to lead to a really rapid Spanish conquest. And so there's a replacement of this Aztec Empire with a Spanish-speaking governance and a mestizo or mixed race population. We're going to pause here. I've laid out now this rationale for conquest, and in our next video we're going to look at how Christian mission and enculturation takes place in this very complex context.